Okay, so get this. We're diving into this conversation with, you've got YouTuber George Janko, his fiancee Belle, and Christian apologist Cliffe Knechtle.
Oh, this is a deep one.
They're going deep on some
Yeah.
seriously big questions about faith.
Yeah.
And I love a good deep dive, so.
Yeah, you've got George, this like super successful YouTuber, and he's known for keeping it really real. And so he's going head to head with Cliff on some like really tough questions of Christianity.
Yeah, he doesn't hold back at all.
No.
Like right out of the gate, he's talking about this idea of fairness. Like if someone grows up in a Christian home, is it unfair that their path to faith might seem easier than someone who's never even like heard of Jesus?
Right. It's a question a lot of us wrestle with, I think. And Cliff even points to scripture like in the book of Romans, where it talks about God judging us based on what we're aware of.
Yeah.
He even uses the example of like Old Testament figures like Abraham, who had like deep faith, but without knowing Jesus in the same way that we know Jesus now.
Okay, so it's interesting because it kind of suggests that there's not just one right way
Right.
to find God.
Exactly. It's God meeting us where we are.
Yeah.
But George takes it like a step further and he's like, well, how about suffering?
Yeah.
If God is all love, like how can he allow things like children starving to death?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Which is always a tough one for me. And Cliff's response is interesting because he basically says that we can't equate financial prosperity with God's blessings. Like, just because you have money doesn't mean that God is, like, blessing you.
Right.
And he actually drops this statistic, which I thought was interesting. Statistically, Christians are the most generous demographic when it comes to giving.
Wow. It's about walking the walk, right?
Yeah.
Not just talking the talk.
Yes. Put your money where your mouth is.
And that leads to this really raw moment where George gets really honest about his own struggles with sin.
Yes.
Specifically, premarital relations with Belle, who was right there.
Right there.
And you can hear it in his voice. He's like really struggling with this.
Yeah, and I thought Cliff's response was so powerful because rather than judgment or condemnation, he meets George with compassion, and he talks about how forgiveness is like canceling a debt.
Got it.
It doesn't erase the wrong, but it releases the person who wronged you from having to carry that burden.
Okay, so it's a choice, not just a feeling.
Yes, like you are actually choosing to let go of resentment.
Wow, I like that.
And this is where I think Belle really connects with Cliff's message, because she talks about how understanding God's grace, this idea that we don't earn our salvation, it's a free gift, lifted a huge weight off her shoulders because she was carrying so much shame and guilt.
Yeah, because we're always harder on ourselves than anyone else is on us.
Totally. And I think that's why this concept of grace is so powerful.
Right.
But George, being George, has to take it there. He brings up these verses in the Bible about people doing all these great things in the name of God, but then they're still turned away.
Oh, yeah. It's like, wait, so just being a good person isn't enough.
Right. And that's what's so fascinating about this conversation.
Yeah, so what's the deal with that?
Because he gets at what it really is. It's about intention.
Oh, yeah.
It's not about checking things off your to-do list to get into heaven.
Yeah.
It's the why behind what you're doing. Oh, are you doing good things out of love, or are you just trying to score points?
Oh, it's the difference between helping someone because you actually care about them or helping someone because you want to impress your friends.
Exactly.
Oh.
The motivation behind it matters.
Motivation matters.
And all of this discussion about good deeds and salvation leads to this whole thing about baptism.
Okay.
Because George was baptized as a baby, which got him thinking, does it even count if I didn't consciously choose it?
That's so interesting because I feel like that's a question so many people have.
Yeah.
Like, I was raised Catholic. I was baptized as a baby. Do I need to, like, get rebaptized now?
Totally. And I think that's something that a lot of people who maybe grew up in the church are now like, wait, at what point do I own this faith for myself?
Right.
And Cliff's answer is really interesting because he talks about the importance of confirmation.
Right.
Which is basically this public declaration of your faith.
Yeah.
It's an outward expression of an inward decision.
Okay, so you're solidifying
Yes.
that commitment that was made when you were a baby,
Yep.
but that you didn't consciously choose.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So even if you were baptized as a baby, going through confirmation as an adult is a really powerful way to say, like, I'm choosing this for myself.
Yeah, you're owning it.
Yes.
But George hits him with another one.
Because he's got questions.
How can a loving God condemn someone who lived a good life but never even had a chance to know about Jesus?
Talk about a curveball, right?
Yeah.
And Cliff kind of goes back to what he was saying about Romans, that
Sure.
God judges us based on what we're aware of. So if you've never heard the gospel, are you going to be judged by the same standard as someone who has?
Right.
And he uses this really interesting analogy about like looking at the Grand Canyon.
Okay.
You don't just stand there and think, wow, I'm awesome.
Yeah.
You're humbled by this experience.
Right.
You realize how small you are.
Yeah.
And how much bigger something else is.
Okay, but how does that tie into judging people who never heard of Jesus?
Well, he's saying that the wonders of the universe, the complexity of nature, all point to a creator.
Okay.
So even without a formal understanding of Christianity, you can look around and be like, there's something bigger than me going on here.
So you can still have an awareness of the divine even if you've never stepped foot in a church?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that factors into how you're judged. But here's the thing. Cliffe acknowledges that we don't have all the answers.
Okay.
He emphasizes God's justice and fairness, but we don't know exactly how God will judge those who've never heard of Christ.
So some things remain a mystery.
Exactly. And that can be hard for those of us who like black and white answers.
Right, or want a formula.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder that our human understanding of God is always going to be limited.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit more. This seems like a natural point to pause for.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're wrestling with some pretty heavy questions here about judgment and like the limits of human understanding when it comes to God.
Right, which I think is kind of Cliff's point. Like, we can analyze and we can debate all day long, but at the end of the day, some things are going to remain a mystery.
Right, okay, so true. But George, being the practical guy that he is, he wants to know what specifically gets you into heaven.
He brings up baptism again, right?
Yeah.
Because he was baptized as a baby, so he's like, well, do I need to do it again now that I'm older, now that my faith is more about my choices?
Totally, yeah. Is a baby baptism legit if you didn't actually choose it?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
It is a question I've heard from a lot of people.
Yeah.
But Cliff says no, it's not about checking boxes or going through the motions.
Okay.
He uses this really funny example of Keira Knightley, the actress.
Yeah.
She once said that, like, being a Christian would be so easy because you could just do whatever you want and then ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah, that's kind of the stereotype, right? That people have.
But he's like, nope, not how this works. He's very adamant that true faith is about more than just words.
Yeah.
It's about a changed heart that's reflected in your actions.
Right. So it's not about earning your way into heaven.
Right.
But it's about like your life aligning with your beliefs.
Yes.
It's like that saying, faith without works is dead.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about putting your faith into action.
Putting your faith into action.
And speaking of action, they also talk about this idea of like finding guidance in life.
Okay.
Which I know is something a lot of people struggle with.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
George even asks about looking for signs.
Right.
Like hoping for a billboard from God to point him in the right direction.
Should I take this job? God, give me a sign.
Yes.
Should I go on this date?
Is she the one?
Is he the one?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all want those clear-cut answers.
At the top. But he cautions against relying on signs too much.
Oh, Ty.
He says true guidance comes from cultivating a relationship with God through prayer, through studying the Bible, through surrounding yourself with other Christians.
Okay, so creating that foundation.
Yes.
So that you can hear him.
Exactly. It's about tuning your heart to hear God's voice in those everyday moments, not waiting for these big flashy signs.
Okay, I like that.
Which I think is interesting when you think about George's career because he's in entertainment.
Right, which can be seen as kind of secular.
Right, and so he talks about surrendering that to God.
Okay.
He says, God, if you want this to be fruitful, let's rock it out together.
I love that.
And if this is bad for me, I want it so far away from me, I don't even want to see it with my eyes.
Like, close the doors that aren't meant for me.
Hey!
If it's not your will, let it go.
It's a really interesting way to approach decision-making, right? To be like, okay, God, if it's not meant to be, it's just not going to work out.
It takes a lot of pressure off, too.
It does.
If you can actually believe it.
It does.
Okay, so speaking of faith, though.
Yes.
Things take kind of a turn when someone from the audience asks this really common question.
Okay.
Do you need to go to church?
Ooh.
Especially if you feel like a lot of churches are kind of messed up.
Yeah. How can you reconcile the imperfections of the people in the church with this idea of a perfect God?
Okay.
And I love that they don't shy away from this question.
Yeah.
Because it's real.
Totally.
And Cliff acknowledges straight up, no church is perfect.
Right, because they're full of people who are
Lots are
flawed.
human beings, yeah.
But he points to all these Harvard studies. Who knew Harvard was studying church attendance?
I love that.
Right.
Like, shout out to Harvard.
Yeah, that showed this really strong correlation between going to church regularly
Okay.
and all these positive outcomes.
Like what?
Longer life expectancy,
Okay.
lower rates of depression,
Wow.
stronger marriages.
Interesting.
So statistically speaking,
Okay.
there's something to be said for being a part of that community, even if it's not perfect.
So it's like finding that support system.
Exactly.
That sense of belonging.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he uses this great analogy of the church being like a hospital.
Ooh, I like that.
It's not a place for perfect people.
It's where the sick people go to get better.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. It's a place for broken people to come and find healing.
Yes.
But speaking of struggles, George doesn't shy away from the really tough topics.
Now, George goes there.
He does.
What's he get into now?
He brings up hell.
Oh, boy.
And his reaction is so human.
What did he say?
He's basically like, how can a loving God send people to eternal suffering?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense.
That's the question of the ages, right?
It is.
Like, how do we reconcile that?
It's a question that people way smarter than me have been wrestling with for centuries.
Yeah, there's no easy answer, is there?
There's not an easy answer, but Cliffe does emphasize that while the Bible doesn't give us all these details about what hell is actually like, it's very clear that it represents separation from God.
Which, if you think about it, is its own kind of torment, right?
It is.
To be eternally cut off from the source of all love and goodness.
And it makes you wonder, like, if that's what hell is, what does it look like to be in his presence?
Oh, that's a good question.
Right.
It's like the flip side of it.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. And something else that I thought was interesting that he brought up was this idea of purgatory.
Okay.
Which is very much a Catholic.
Yes, a Catholic belief.
And he makes this point that I had never really considered before, which is that actually contradicts Jesus' sacrifice.
It's like if you still have to earn your way out of purgatory, what was the point?
Right. Wasn't the whole point that Jesus took care of that?
Exactly.
Like, we don't have to do that on our own?
That through his sacrifice, we're forgiven, we're reconciled.
Right.
But then, just when you think the conversation couldn't get any heavier...
Yeah, where do you go from there?
George asks about marijuana.
Out of nowhere.
What?
Like, what?
I love it.
It's such a George thing to do, right? Keeping it real no matter what.
Yeah.
And what I love is it doesn't turn into this big moral debate.
Okay.
It turns into this conversation about moderation and taking care of our bodies.
Right. How do we approach substances in a way that honors God in our bodies?
Exactly. And George talks about how he uses it to help with his insomnia.
Okay.
And he even says that he prefers it to, like, prescription sleep aids.
Oh, which, let's be real, a lot of people can relate to that.
Oh, totally.
But it's also like, it's a slippery slope, right?
It is.
Because what starts as medicinal can easily become recreational.
For sure. And Cliffe is careful to point that out.
Okay.
He's like,
right.
You know, while there might be legitimate medicinal uses for it, right.
We have to be mindful of our intentions.
Yes.
And not let anything control us.
It's about finding that balance.
Exactly.
Like you were saying.
Yes.
Not just with this, but with everything.
Everything.
Okay.
And then just when you think the marijuana talk is winding down, George drops the bomb.
What's the bomb?
He likes to read the Bible high.
Oh my gosh, he really just said that.
He did, and I love it.
Kind of love it too.
It brings this like much needed lightness after all this heavy stuff about hell and damnation.
Total mood lifter.
Right. And you can tell Cliffe can't help but laugh. He's like, well, you smoked it. It's over for you. The internet's coming for you.
He's like, that's it. You're done.
Which is just this good reminder that, like, faith doesn't have to be so serious all the time.
Totally.
It's okay to laugh. It's okay to find joy in unexpected places.
And honestly, if it helps you connect with God, who are we to judge?
Right, to each their own spiritual journey.
Right, exactly.
But you know what else I thought was interesting about that whole marijuana conversation?
What's that?
It's like the perfect example of how our beliefs about right and wrong are always evolving.
Yes.
Something that was once seen as completely taboo is now being openly discussed, even debated.
Yeah, within the church even.
Within the church.
It's interesting.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have, from the fairness of God
to the importance of confirmation.
To the complexities of hell.
Even a little weed wisdom thrown in there.
A little weed wisdom.
It's just for fun.
For good measure.
Right. But there's one last part to this conversation that I think is really going to stay with you.
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you ready for the grand finale?
Hit me with it.
All right, so we're about to get like philosophical up in here.
Okay.
As we wrap up this deep dive.
Okay.
So we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
But Cliffe leaves us with this quote.
Okay.
From a surprising source, David Foster Wallace.
Okay.
The author of Infinite Jest.
Yeah.
And get this, Wallace was an atheist.
Wow. Okay.
Which makes the quote even more powerful.
It does.
So Wallace was a brilliant guy, struggled with a big depression, ultimately took his own life.
Yeah.
And yet, from this place of, like, personal darkness,
Right.
he tapped into this universal truth.
Okay.
We all worship something.
We do.
It's that line from his Kenyon College commencement speech.
Yeah.
Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship.
It's true.
Mic drop moment right there.
Yeah, and he goes on to say that, like, if we worship finite things,
Okay.
things of this world,
So, like,
money, power, beauty,
yeah.
even our own intellect,
Okay.
it will eventually eat us alive.
Because those things can only satisfy us for so long, right?
Right. They're fleeting. They can be taken away.
Exactly.
And if our whole identity is built around them, what happens when they're gone?
Right. It's like, then what?
Exactly.
So is it even about whether or not we believe in God?
Right.
But just what are you putting your faith in?
What are you devoting your time, your energy, your very life to?
It's like that saying, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
100%.
If we're honest with ourselves, what are the things we truly treasure?
Yeah. What are you building your life around?
And are those things leading us towards a deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment?
Or are they just distractions from the bigger question?
Right, the big question.
About life and death and what it all means?
Those are heavy.
They are.
But I think that's the beauty of this whole conversation.
It is.
It's not about, like, giving us the easy answers.
Right.
It's about making us think,
It's about challenging us.
challenging our beliefs.
Yes, and I love that they can have this very raw and honest conversation
Yeah,
about faith with all of its complexities and even contradictions.
totally. And from all these different perspectives, too.
Exactly. And it's like, it's okay to wrestle with doubts, to not have all the answers.
Yeah, just to ask the question.
Ask the question.
And sometimes the most profound insights can come from the most unexpected places,
Oh, for sure.
like a conversation between a YouTuber, his fiancée, and a Christian apologist.
Totally. Or like even an atheist author who reminds us that we all worship something.
That's right. The question is, what will we choose?
What will you choose?
Ooh. And on that note, I think we'll leave you to ponder that one.
Yes.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time,
Until next time.
keep seeking, keep questioning, keep exploring.